The quiet clink of a spoon against porcelain echoed in the stillness of the kitchen. Charlotte Whitmore sat across from her husband, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't fidget. She simply waited, with the kind of practiced calm that comes from years of knowing when not to speak. Sunlight filtered through the window, soft and golden, catching the silver in Douglas's hair, the same temples she once traced with gentle fingers when love felt real. He didn't look up. "To be honest," he said, voice flat, "I regret marrying you." No anger, no cruelty, just a casual sentence, like a passing thought about the weather. Charlotte didn't flinch. She didn't need him to explain. That one sentence did more damage than shouting ever could. It quietly snapped something inside her that had been stretched thin for years. She didn't ask why, didn't argue. She simply rose from her chair, steadying herself with one hand on the table, and walked out of the room. Upstairs, everything looked untouched. Their bedroom was pristine, staged like a hotel room. The bed was made, her robe hung where it always did, his cufflinks were lined up in their tray. 40 years of shared space now felt like a set, carefully arranged, rarely lived in. She opened the closet and pulled out her old suitcase. Dust coated the zipper. Every motion was deliberate as she packed, not because she was coming back, but because she still honored what they used to be. She paused at her leather journal. It held years of hidden truths, private tears, and memories no one else would remember. She held it for a long moment, then set it back down. It belonged here, in the house she had kept breathing, even when she'd stopped. Downstairs, Douglas sat unmoved, eyes fixed on his coffee. Charlotte grabbed her keys, stepped into the crisp morning air, and walked away with nothing she didn't need. For the first time in years, she felt light. Charlotte met Douglas when she was 23, fresh into her first job as a high school librarian in a small Maine town. He was 27, already running his family's hardware store. He wasn't charming, no love notes or flowers, but he was solid, safe. And after growing up in a house full of shouting and silence, Charlotte thought safe might be enough. They married the next spring. She wore her sister's hand-me-down dress. Douglas built their first dining table by hand. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. When Haley was born, Charlotte left her job. Then came Liam. 3 years later. She never called it a sacrifice. It was love. It was being a mother. It was what women did. Douglas worked. Charlotte made the house a home. She did the invisible work, laundry, lunches, hand-sewn costumes, pancakes every Sunday, even if no one talked much. She found joy in the details, matching socks, fresh sheets every Thursday, coffee strong and toast just right, because Douglas liked it that way. But when the kids moved out, the house fell quiet. Charlotte had imagined traveling together, maybe picking up a hobby, but Douglas drifted further inward. He buried himself in headlines and weather forecasts, conversations thin to shrugs and nods. Sometimes, he left the room mid-sentence. Still, Charlotte looked for joy, a book club, volunteering, new recipes. She'd serve dinner with hope in her eyes, waiting for him to notice. Sometimes he did, mostly, he didn't. What startled her wasn't the silence, it was how easily she'd adapted to it, how she'd learned to want less, to settle for crumbs, a smile, a single thank you. She asked for nothing more. And slowly, she vanished. It was a Saturday in late spring when something inside her shifted for good. She had spent 2 weeks planning a family brunch. Haley, her husband, and their kids were coming. Liam was flying in from Chicago. Even Douglas had nodded when she mentioned it. She went all in, fresh flowers, her mother's napkins, blueberry muffins from scratch, and a quiche, just the way Douglas used to like it. That morning, she smiled as Douglas walked into the kitchen. He wore a golf polo and scrolled through his phone. "I made all your favorites," she said gently. He barely glanced at the table. "Didn't we have this last year?" It stung, but she let it pass. "It's Haley's favorite," she said, arranging the forks. Haley arrived in a rush, kids trailing behind. She gave Charlotte a quick wave before disappearing into the living room. Liam came next, warm, present, and thoughtful, giving her a real hug and complimenting the smell of the house. They sat down. The conversation floated around Haley's work, the kids' schedules, Liam's apartment hunt. Douglas made sarcastic comments here and there, mostly about the news. Charlotte, as always, stayed attentive, quiet, holding the rhythm of the room. Mid-meal, Haley bit into a muffin and winced. "Mom, these are really dry. Did you change the recipe?" Charlotte looked up. "No, it's the same I've always used." Maybe it's the altitude or something, Haley said, setting the muffin down. Douglas chuckled. She's always had a gift for making things complicated, Douglas said with a smirk, sipping his coffee. Then, as if on cue, he added, remember that birthday cake she made for Liam? Forgot the sugar completely. Laughter erupted around the table. I was 6, Liam chuckled, thought she was trying to poison me. Douglas grinned. At least it looked good. She always tries hard, it's the follow-through that trips her up. More laughter. Charlotte didn't laugh. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, eyes on her plate. Her smile was practiced, polite, but her cheeks burned. Liam noticed. The quiche was really good, Mom, he said quietly. But the moment had already moved on. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't loud, but it was intimate, dismissive, and it cut deeper than anyone else seemed to notice. After dessert, Charlotte slipped away. No one followed. She stood alone in the kitchen, wrists deep in warm soapy water, washing dishes she'd scrubbed 1,000 times before. Laughter drifted in from the living room, easy, casual, untouched by her absence. No one asked where she went. Or worse, maybe they noticed, and simply didn't care. That was the moment, not a shatter, not a scream, but a quiet click. Something inside her sealed shut. That night, after everyone had gone and Douglas had patted her shoulder with a distracted, "You did good today," they were happy. She smiled, waited for him to vanish down the hall, and then sat alone under the soft kitchen light. She opened her journal and wrote a single line. I think I'm done being the joke in my own story. 3 weeks passed. Douglas slipped back into routine, golf, TV, to-do lists Charlotte no longer managed. He didn't notice the meals had shrunk to toast and soup. He didn't notice anything. On a Tuesday morning, Charlotte stood in front of her closet, holding a dress she hadn't worn in years, deep green, elegant, modest. It reminded her of who she used to be, before she became a shadow. It still fit. She didn't cry. Instead, she took a long breath, the kind you take before walking into something you can't undo. She pulled out her old lavender-scented suitcase. Carefully, intentionally, she packed a few outfits, her favorite sweater, a framed photo of the kids when they were little, and her journal. That afternoon, Douglas walked through the door to find her sipping tea at the kitchen counter. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? He asked without looking up. She didn't respond. Charlotte? Annoyance, not concern. She met his eyes, calm, steady. I'm leaving. He blinked. Leaving? For how long? She nodded toward the suitcase. I'm staying with Nora for a while. His confusion flickered into irritation. Why? What's this about? Her voice didn't waver. I need to remember who I am, because whatever this is, it's not living. He scoffed. So now you're the victim? She shook her head softly. No, not anymore. He didn't stop her. He didn't argue. He didn't ask her to stay. And that told her everything she needed to know. Charlotte walked out without drama, no slamming doors, no tears, just quiet certainty. She had entered that house as a bride. She had raised 2 children under its roof. She had poured decades of invisible love into its bones. Now she carried only what was hers, her peace, her voice, her choice. Nora opened the door before Charlotte even knocked. You don't have to explain, she said gently, the guest room's ready. The first night was hardest, not because she missed Douglas, but because the silence felt unfamiliar. No one asked about dinner. No one interrupted her thoughts. No one made her feel like a background character in her own home. She sat on the twin bed, suitcase still zipped, and let the quiet stretch. It didn't feel like comfort. Not yet. But it felt honest. That night, in her journal, she wrote, I'm not angry, I'm not bitter, I'm not broken, I'm just tired of being invisible, and today, I chose to be seen, even if only by myself. The days blurred. Nora left fresh towels on the door, flowers on the nightstand. Charlotte helped with dishes, sat in the sunroom with tea, joined her for errands. But inside, she felt hollow, like a version of herself had been peeled away. She wandered the house at night. Once, she stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m., gripping the counter in the dark. She didn't cry, she didn't shout. She just stood, still and quiet, trying to remember what it felt like to exist without performing usefulness. She thought of every birthday, every silent forgiveness, every unthanked effort. And she didn't blame anyone, not Douglas, not her children. She just saw it clearly now. She had built a life around being needed. But no one truly saw her, only what she could do. On the fourth night, she finally cried. Quiet tears, no drama, just steady release. When the sobs passed, what remained wasn't hope, not yet. But it was something real. Awareness. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Charlotte didn't make announcements. She didn't explain to the kids. She didn't call Douglas. She simply stopped showing up to a life that had erased her. And at first, no one noticed. Douglas carried on, TV dinners, missed birthdays, socks on the floor. But soon, the absence took shape. He couldn't find documents. He couldn't log into accounts. He called one afternoon, voice flat. "Are you coming to get your things?" "I already did," she said. "You mean, not yet?" "No, Douglas, I mean, not at all." A pause, then a scoff. "So you're really throwing everything away over one conversation?" She exhaled. "It's not about one moment, it's about a lifetime of being overlooked. I just stopped pretending not to notice." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just said, "Well, that's sad," and hung up. A week later, he texted, "Where are the medical records?" She replied, "In the cabinet under the printer, same place they've been for 10 years. No emojis, no warmth. That was when Douglas began to understand. Not all at once. But slowly. In missed birthdays. In empty rooms. In the silence that no longer felt peaceful. Her absence wasn't just a hole. It was a mirror. He had mistaken her reliability for simplicity, her silence for contentment, her presence for permanence. Without Charlotte, Douglas was exposed. The silence she left behind wasn't peaceful, it was revealing, and in its absence, Charlotte began to change. At first, it was subtle, but Nora noticed. "You're glowing a little," she said over coffee one morning. Charlotte smiled. "It's probably just my moisturizer." Nora shook her head. "No, it's something else. You don't shrink anymore when you talk about him." And she was right. Charlotte wasn't bitter, she wasn't seeking revenge. She had simply returned to herself, her voice, her body, her quiet, steady strength. Even her children noticed. Haley texted, "Dad says you're not answering. Are you okay?" Charlotte looked at the screen for a long moment. In the past, she would have replied quickly, reassured, softened the truth. This time, she wrote, "I'm okay, I just don't want to keep pretending I'm not hurt." No response came right away. But 3 days later, "I didn't realize how far things had gone. I'm sorry." And just like that, the silence began to crack, not through conflict, but through honesty. Charlotte hadn't shouted. She hadn't slammed doors. She had simply walked away, and let the absence speak. She never planned to return to that house. She'd already taken everything she needed, her journal, a few clothes, and her peace. But when Douglas messaged weeks later with a different tone, measured, respectful, something told her to go. "I cleaned out the attic, found a few of your things. You can come get them if you'd like. I'll stay out of the way." She agreed, not because she owed him anything, but because she deserved closure. It was a bright afternoon when she pulled into the driveway of the house they'd shared for nearly 40 years. The garden beds were overgrown. The steps were crooked. The mailbox still leaned to the left. Douglas opened the door. He looked older, not in years, but in wear. Tired, deflated, smaller than she remembered. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. "I didn't expect you to ask," she replied. Inside, a few boxes waited by the staircase. "These are yours, I didn't know what to do with them." She opened one, photo albums, a few cookbooks, a shawl her mother had made. Ordinary things, but full of meaning. "Thank you," she said softly. Then he added, hesitantly, "I read your journal." Her body stilled. "I didn't leave it for you," she said. "I know, but I needed to understand, and now I do." She met his eyes, calm, unwavering. "Then you understand I stopped being your wife long before I packed my suitcase." He nodded slowly. "I thought you'd always be there, like the floor, or the roof. I didn't realize you had an end." She didn't smile, she didn't cry. "I tried to tell you," she said. Not with anger, but with effort, with presence, with hope. "You just weren't listening." He looked down. "I didn't know how to love someone who didn't need fixing," he said quietly. "You were whole, Charlotte." I think I resented that. She didn't offer comfort, just truth. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to say goodbye. She picked up the smallest box and turned to leave. Douglas didn't stop her, he didn't beg. He only stood there, silent. At the door, she turned once more. For what it's worth, she said. I hope one day you learn to see people before they leave. And then she walked out. Free, clear, entirely her own. Back at the cabin, tucked between pine trees and the shimmer of a still lake, Charlotte stood on the porch. The sun dipped low, washing the world in gold. She held her journal in one hand, tea in the other. She hadn't written anything yet. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving out of duty or guilt or fear. She was simply living, on her terms. She planted lavender at the steps, baked bread just because she loved the smell, taught watercolor at the community center. She no longer checked her phone for apologies. She didn't wait for someone to notice her absence. She wasn't searching for validation, because now, she saw herself. One night, she opened her new journal and wrote a single sentence. I didn't leave to be alone, I left to become whole. And that changed everything. To anyone watching from the outside, it might look like a quiet retreat. But for Charlotte, it was a return. A return to herself. To anyone who's ever been made to feel invisible. You don't have to be loud to reclaim your life. You just have to be honest. You just have to choose yourself, every single day.